What if the biggest cultural divide in the Western world isn't about money, military power, or technology, but about what you're allowed to say, think, question, or joke about without consequences? Over the last decade, one word has quietly reshaped workplaces, universities, media, politics, and even laws across entire continents. That word is woke. Some see it as overdue social progress and a necessary correction to historical injustice. Others see it as ideological overreach that replaces open debate with moral conformity. And depending on whether you live in the United States or Europe, woke culture doesn't just feel different, it operates differently, enforces itself differently, and carries very different consequences. In America, woke culture is loud, confrontational, and deeply tied to identity politics and social media activism. It thrives on visibility, virality, and public pressure. In Europe, it's quieter, more bureaucratic, and often enforced through institutions. Both sides accuse the other of going too far. Both claim moral superiority. But when you strip away the outrage, the protests, and the headlines, a deeper question remains: who actually has it more and which version has the bigger impact on everyday life for ordinary people? Before we break this down using real examples, real policies, and real cultural shifts up to late 2025, take a moment to like the video, subscribe to the channel, and turn on notifications. This isn't culture war clickbait designed to make you angry. This is about understanding how power, speech, and social norms are being reshaped in real time and why it affects everyone, whether they care about politics or not. To understand who wins the woke culture debate, you first need to understand what woke culture actually is. The term originated in African American communities in the United States, meaning awareness of racial injustice and systemic inequality. It was originally a warning to stay alert to unfair systems of power. Over time, especially after 2014 and the rise of social media activism, the word expanded far beyond its original meaning. By the early 2020s, woke became shorthand for a broader ideological framework centered on identity, power dynamics, social justice, language control, and moral signaling. In the United States, woke culture evolved primarily through social pressure rather than law. Universities, corporations, media outlets, and entertainment industries became the main battlegrounds. Social media amplified everything, rewarding outrage and punishing nuance. A single tweet could cost someone their job. Public apologies became ritualistic, sometimes demanded even when no clear wrongdoing occurred. Language changed rapidly, sometimes faster than people could realistically keep up. Terms like microaggressions, privilege, safe spaces, and cancel culture entered mainstream conversation and reshaped how people interacted at work and online. Corporate America embraced the movement aggressively after 2020. Diversity, equity, and inclusion programs expanded rapidly across Fortune 500 companies. By 2023, DEI spending in the US corporate sector reached into the billions annually. Hiring practices, training sessions, internal reporting systems, and promotion criteria increasingly focused on identity metrics alongside, or sometimes above, performance. Supporters argued this corrected historic injustice and built fairer workplaces. Critics argued it introduced new forms of discrimination, resentment, and ideological testing. At the same time, American woke culture remained largely unofficial. The U.S. Constitution's First Amendment still protects speech broadly. The government cannot criminalize offensive opinions the way some European states can. Instead, enforcement happens socially and economically. Employers fire people. Platforms demonetize creators. Universities disinvite speakers. Social circles fracture. The punishment isn't jail, it's reputation, income, and access to opportunity. This is why woke culture in America feels chaotic. There is no central authority and no clear rulebook. Norms change quickly. One year's acceptable language becomes next year's offense. The rules are enforced unevenly, often based on who has social power or institutional protection. Critics argue this creates fear, self-censorship, and instability. Supporters argue it holds people accountable where laws cannot and pushes society forward. Europe, on the other hand, took a very different path. European woke culture is less visible but far more institutional. Instead of viral cancellations and online pilo-ns, Europe relies on laws, regulations, and courts. Hate speech legislation has existed in many European countries for decades, long before woke became a global buzzword. But by the mid-2010s and accelerating through the 2020s, these laws expanded in scope and interpretation, often in response to changing demographics and social tensions. Countries like Germany, France, the UK, Sweden, and Canada's European counterparts strengthened restrictions around speech related to race, religion, gender identity, and national identity. In Germany, Holocaust denial and certain forms of hate speech remain criminal offences. In the UK, police began recording non-crime hate incidents, which do not require a crime to have occurred but still enter official records. By 2024, multiple high-profile court cases debated the balance between free expression and emotional or psychological harm. Unlike the US, Europe does not treat free speech as absolute. Most European legal systems prioritize social harmony, dignity, and public order over unrestricted expression. Schools implement standardized diversity and inclusion curricula nationwide rather than leaving decisions to local communities. The result is a different kind of pressure. Americans fear social cancellation and public backlash. Europeans fear bureaucratic consequences, legal exposure, and institutional penalties. One is chaotic and cultural. The other is orderly and legal. Polling data up to 2025 reflects this divide. Surveys from Pew Research Center and European Social Survey data show Americans are far more polarized on woke issues, with sharp divisions across political and generational lines. Europeans, while less emotionally divided, often report confusion, fatigue, and quiet resentment, particularly in countries where immigration, national identity, and speech laws collide. Immigration highlights this difference clearly. In the US, debates over immigration and identity play out loudly in media, protests, and elections. In Europe, mass migration from the Middle East and Africa created social tensions that governments often address through policy rather than open debate. Critics argue that discussing these issues openly can lead to accusations of xenophobia or even legal trouble. Universities provide another contrast. American campuses are ground zero for woke activism. Student protests, speaker shutdowns, and ideological conformity are widely documented. In Europe, universities tend to be less theatrical but more regulated. Academic speech codes exist, and certain research topics face funding barriers or administrative scrutiny. Media ecosystems amplify these differences. American media is polarized but competitive, with strong outlets on both sides of the cultural divide. European public broadcasters are more centralized and often align with state policies, leading critics to argue that dissenting views are marginalized rather than debated. By 2025, backlash against woke culture has emerged in both regions, but again, differently. In the US, debates over immigration and identity play out loudly in media, protests, and elections. In Europe, mass migration from the Middle East and Africa created social tensions that governments often address through policy rather than open debate. Critics argue that discussing these issues openly can lead to accusations of xenophobia or even legal trouble. Universities provide another contrast. American campuses are ground zero for woke activism. Student protests, speaker shutdowns, and ideological conformity are widely documented. In Europe, universities tend to be less theatrical but more regulated. Academic speech codes exist, and certain research topics face funding barriers or administrative scrutiny. Media ecosystems amplify these differences. American media is polarized but competitive, with strong outlets on both sides of the cultural divide. European public broadcasters are more centralized and often align with state policies, leading critics to argue that dissenting views are marginalized rather than debated. By 2025, backlash against woke culture has emerged in both regions, but again, differently. In the US, backlash takes the form of political movements, state-level legislation, court challenges, and corporate pullbacks from aggressive DEI programs. Several major companies quietly reduced or rebranded diversity initiatives after shareholder pressure and legal risks became clearer. In Europe, backlash appears through elections. Populist and nationalist parties gained ground across France, Italy, Germany, the Netherlands, and Scandinavia. Many of these movements explicitly oppose identity-based politics and speech restrictions. Yet even when these parties win, existing legal frameworks limit how much can change. So who actually has it more? If woke culture means social enforcement, public shaming, and ideological activism, the United States leads. The intensity, speed, and visibility are unmatched. Careers rise and fall overnight. Cultural battles dominate daily conversation. If woke culture means institutional enforcement, legal authority, and long-term policy integration, Europe leads. The consequences may be quieter, but they are harder to escape. Laws outlast trends. Bureaucracy doesn't apologize. The deeper issue isn't geography, it's balance. Societies need moral progress, but they also need open debate. They need inclusion, but they also need freedom to question. When ideology becomes immune to criticism, whether enforced by mobs or ministries, it stops being justice and starts becoming control. By the end of 2025, one thing is undeniable: woke culture is not disappearing. It has embedded itself into Western institutions, education systems, corporate governance, and political language. The question is no longer whether it exists, but how far it should go, and who gets to define its limits. If this video helped you see the issue more clearly, take a moment to like the video, subscribe to the channel, and share it with someone who thinks the answer is obvious. And now I want to hear from you: is woke culture more dangerous when it's enforced by society, or when it's enforced by law, and why? Drop your answer in the comments below.